ProQuest week number 2 is in the books, and we've got some results to talk about, and yeah, they're a bit different than what you might expect, but then maybe again, you might expect it because, well, the meta has been all over the place, and that is quite frankly incredibly exciting. So if we're taking a look at week number 1, week number 1 looked like this. It was the final week for Dromai, and well, Dromai dominated the meta, as you can see, with 20 wins, but right behind her was KO with 15. Dorinthia was up there, and then Prism snuck in out of nowhere and just stole 10 wins, showing up and showing out basically every time she showed up. And this is a pretty cool, a pretty telling, a pretty powerful, reflection of data. But let's take a look at what we see this week. Now that Dromai has moved out of the way, what has happened to the meta? How has it changed? Have any heroes dropped off or risen up? And if we look, here's what we see. The list gets longer. With Dromai stepping away, look at how many heroes are present in the meta currently. KO continues to take the sort of top spot, if you will, taking it essentially from Dromai, but if you removed Dromai from the equation in week 1, he would have been there just the same. Incredibly consistent. He is a numbers deck, and his numbers are better than most things out there, but perhaps arguably not better than Azalea, who has soared up. I mean, if we're looking at week number 1, Azalea was doing okay with 9 wins at week number 1. Now sitting here week number 2, almost snagging the top spot with 14 wins. I said it on the most recent version, the most recent episode, if you will, of our Friday podcast show that we call Give and Take, that Azalea is a force to be reckoned with that can really do some crazy things. And both of my compatriots, my co-casters, my co-hosts, they kind of shrugged it off a little bit, saying Azalea was beatable. Azalea has ways to tech into it, and they're not wrong. But apparently the meta has not adjusted for Azalea. And the question is there some amount of adjustments that can be made for Azalea to be pushed down, or is really just the answer that she is one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the format from a disruptive and an aggro standpoint? Is that just the truth that we are going to discover next week? Looking ahead as well, Prism continues her climb. Her meteoric rise continues as she goes to 13 wins on week 2. And there's also a question mark here with Prism. Is Prism all of a sudden a deck that just absolutely breaks the game wide open on its axis, as players start to pick up and realize how either consistent or easy it is perhaps to put together the Arclight Sentinel loop that essentially allows you to Arclight someone every single turn while also building up a board and push a little bit of damage? If that becomes too consistent, do we get to a point where that deck essentially has to be nerfed in some way, shape, or form for the health of the game? Or is it not really that big of a deal, and instead there are, too many ways to kind of deal with it, and therefore it's up to the meta to self-correct? Essentially, it's the Azalea question. I think these two heroes, Azalea and Prism, are the really big question marks for this format. Are those two heroes at such a power level that they need to be sort of hated out of the format via sideboarding and like specific target silver bullet cards? Is that the necessary equation? Are those heroes so good that we need to actually go forward and see some sort of a suspension or a ban to that extent? I hope not, but then again, I've played against heroes like them, and I've played against them, I should say, and they can be quite oppressive. So the question will be, what shoring up of those matchups needs to take place from week 2 to week 3 to see those numbers change to other, perhaps lower numbers? And will people be willing to make those concessions? Do people want to, or can they? Do they have the capacity to play Warmonger's Diplomacy in their decks? Do they have the capacity to play Time Snap Potion? I will tell you, in my Kasai deck this past weekend, which I took to ProQuest week number 2 and played in ProQuest week number 2, I had a copy of Time Snap Potion and I had Warmonger's Diplomacy in the deck. Straight up. I found a way to cut cards that I really liked to play those cards because I knew that they would give me some amount of percentage points into those matchups. So the question becomes, are other players going to do the same? Because if not, these heroes will continue to look like this. Victor Goldmane also shows up and does some work at 13 wins. Very consistent as well. I want to point this out. If we go back over here, Victor Goldmane was sitting at 10 wins right there. You can see directly under Prism. And, well, not much has changed. Sitting along with her at 13 wins this past weekend is Victor Goldmane. In fact, it was Victor Goldmane that I started off this past weekend's ProQuest with as picking up a win on Kasai, and then it was Victor Goldmane that knocked me out of the top 4. So it's a bit of a feast or famine, but he's a very, very strong and consistent hero when everything is going his way. Trounce is a card. Test of Strength is a card. If Victor finds those early, then he can beat just about anyone, except maybe Prism, because that's unfortunately how it goes. Speaking of Kasai, I took Kasai out for a spin. She is my deck of choice. Dromai is gone, and I'm honestly not even missing her because Kasai is that cool. And Kasai took up 11 wins. 11 wins is actually more than I expected. I feel like Kasai has really fallen off in popularity with regards to a lot of the perhaps more competitive player base. Maybe people think she's too fair. Maybe people think, and this perhaps rightfully so, that Dorinthia is the better of the two warriors and Hatchets is the way to go. But I will say I am a huge fan of Kasai, and I think I'm going to show why, or show out perhaps my deck list and kind of share my thoughts on the hero later this week. So if you'd like to see that, leave a comment down below telling me that you want me to put a deck tech together for you on Kasai, because I think perhaps some people are building her wrong. Just gonna say it. Maybe it's a build issue. Rhinar Reckless Rampage sits at 8 wins, growing in popularity. If we take a look here, Rhinar doesn't even make the top heroes list and is instead relegated to the bottom of the bracket under the Other Heroes tab. And instead, now Rhinar sits sort of in that, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th place, right in front of Kano, who is consistently, a part of the meta. Looking over here, Kano was available and on the board only at 3 wins, but going up in popularity now that Dromai is gone, which was a terrible matchup. Unfortunately, arguably a worse matchup is that of Prism, and she is rising to prominence, which means I feel like he's going to get pushed down. But that always leaves the weird spot open where he can just show up to an event that everyone expects him to be pushed down, and if Prism isn't like there or in the bracket with him, I mean, he just kind of runs the table. And in fact, that is actually kind of what happened at my ProQuest. There was one Kano player, and they just stacked Kano their way to the top 8, and then to the top 4, and then to the top 2. And kudos to them. I'm a big fan. I like that. Dorinthia only with 6 wins. Comparing that to week number 1 with Dorinthia at 12, half of the wins. I think it could be a symptom of people going, Hatchets is good, but holy crap, is it boring. It's a numbers deck. I mean, if you're into that sort of thing, it is just bliss. If you enjoy the consistency of just damage and like inevitability, and there's a lot to that. If you enjoy that, then she's there. But otherwise, it's just like, I'm sending the exact same thing every single turn. I am a Guardian through and through. It could also be that there are a couple of heroes here that trying to, do their damnedest to push you out of the meta a little bit. But if she changes her deck list a little bit, maybe tries to play more aggressive, which I think is what also benefits Kasai, then she could go right back up in week number 3. Katsu sitting at 6, kind of falling off as well, in my opinion. Bolton still playing around in the edges. Like, if we're looking at this list, Bolton was way down in the Other Heroes win, climbs up a good bit here, playing around in the periphery of the meta, but I feel like Bolton is like due for a breakout week, and we might see it next week. Tech Levasan, this is his breakout week. Now that he doesn't have to deal with the dragon empress, if you will, of Dromai, there's a lot of heroes that are kind of coming out of the woodwork. He's one of them. He's quite good into the sort of just fatigue crap deck meta. If you're playing a mid-range, kind of just throw a bunch of junk together and play mid-range, he's going to eat you alive. And Tech Levasan showing up and showing out at 5 wins. I don't think he even picked up a win last week. Let's see. Do I see him on the board? I don't believe I do. Yeah, so this is his breakout weekend. And the only real scary thing he has to deal with right now is Kano. And Kano's not terrible. Kano's not terrible at all. So maybe one that kind of keeps him down. Dash, Inventor Extraordinaire, comes out with 4 wins. Leviah still kind of playing down a little bit. Very powerful deck, but very fickle as well. 4 wins. Riptide shows up. He finally emerges from the deep and does some stuff. In fact, Nathan Crawford put out a video via the Card Guys on his deck list of it. It is a basically a very similar version to a lot of the aggressive, more red line versions of Riptide, based on the deck list I took a peek at. Yeah, so if you want to check that out, I'd recommend it, highly recommend go watch the video. I'm going to be watching it after I finish this one up. And he breaks down the deck list, and I think he sits down with Josh Lau. They talk about it together. I only got about 10 minutes in before I had to go and take care of children, but that's sometimes the life of it, so I got to get back to that one as well. But Riptide showing up and finally kind of making his mark a little bit into the meta. By the way, very well positioned with traps into a variety of heroes. Some of those traps are back breaking into a variety of heroes, and them being able to play them at the end game when you're low life is terrifying. And then other heroes a little smaller this week, but that's because a lot of these points and a lot of these wins went to these just variety of heroes. It wasn't like the top decks, like 5 or 6 top decks taking the wins and then just a couple of, smattering here and there. It was very well spread out, but other heroes, Max the Hype Nitro picks up some wins. Azuri, which I expected to have more of a showing here, didn't actually pick up that many. Arachne Huntsman found a win. That's right, Arachne Huntsman. All of the bottom of the bin, bottom tier heroes are showing up except Vincett. But I think Vincett's probably going to have a turnaround if Prism lurks. Vincett's pretty good. Bravo Showstopper picks up a win. The old Bravo. Dash.io shows up and picks up a win. And Viserai. Turtle Burst is a thing, and even just like the straight up normal OTK is a thing. Viserai still exists in the meta, but what a meta we live in. What a time to be alive in Flesh and Blood. Look, when we were looking at this meta right here, when we were looking at the pre-Dromai rotation meta, we looked at this and we were like, we have it good. This is a good looking meta. Are we just spoiled for good things right now? Or is this actually too good? Do you look at this and you go, I don't even know which way to go at this point? I think this actually very much rewards players that want to play a specific deck. If you love Dorinthia, this is so rewarding, because those of you who loved to play that hero are now getting paid off for knowing how the hero works into a variety of other heroes. Like, if you've been a long time Riptide stan, first of all, congratulations. You are one of the cool kids. Second of all, you're getting paid off right now. Like, Tommy Fresh is so happy right now because Driptide is a thing, and that is pretty awesome. And if you want to support the channel, and if you want to see more, maybe even daily videos, make this number go slightly higher and consider supporting on Patreon, so one day I could wake up, sit down here, and make things for you whenever you want it. Full time, who knows? That could be a thing. As always, thanks for watching.